So item number 7, we have on the line Paul Mitchell from Redistricting Partners, who is going to be joining us via Zoom. Hello, Paul. Following the presentation, we will open to the public hearing, ask for speakers, and close the public hearing. This item is listed for optional action should the governing board wish to provide formal direction to the consultant regarding changes to and/or elimination of one or more draft maps. This is just to put everything in context for us. This is the 4th public hearing to gather public input in connection with the transition to trustee area elections. Tonight's public hearing is devoted to review of the draft maps prepared based on traditional districting principles, the finalized 2020 census data, community input received to date, and the many discussions that we've had with our governing board during the September 13th, October 4th, December 13th public hearings, as well as today. We will now be hearing from our consultant at Redistricting Partners first, then invite community members to speak. The board wants to hear from all of our communities as we move forward in establishing trustee area election boundaries, and we welcome your ideas and comments, and we really want this to be a community-driven process. And I see the League of Women Voters well represented today and at our previous meeting, so we really do appreciate it holding us accountable. Thank you. We have written comments that were submitted prior to the meeting. The comments have been shared with all trustees and attached to the meeting agenda as part of the permanent meeting record. All board discussions with redistricting partners about trustee area boundary lines have and will continue to take place in public meetings. All draft maps have been posted on the website for public review and comment, and any revised or additional draft maps will be posted at least 7 days before the next public hearing. The board is committed to an open, transparent, and public process, and we really do believe in that. The final public hearing, which will be the governing board, which is when the governing board will adopt a map and determine the sequence of elections. So the sequencing of our elections, as in when the two individual seats are up for election, as well as our adoption of our map, is going to be taking place on February 14th. So looking forward to seeing you all on Valentine's Day. This new election system will be implemented over 2 election cycles starting in November of 2022. You can visit the district's trustee area website at fhda.edu/trustee-areas for resources and information regarding the transition and additional ways to participate. So like I had mentioned, we will turn our attention over to Paul Mitchell with the Redistricting Partners for a brief presentation, and then we will open it up to any public and board comments. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. And this will be a brief presentation. As you'll note, as people who've been watching this will notice, we started with very long presentations, going through a lot of the details of redistricting. And as we get closer to the end, we try to narrow that down. If members of the public hear something I say and want to know more about it, it's very likely that we went into more detail in one of our prior hearings. I'll go ahead and share my screen and go through this brief presentation. So get this going. The purpose of this hearing is to discuss draft map plans that have been created by the board and with us as your consultants to attempt to achieve all the things that need to happen in a conversion to district elections. And it's requirements under the California Voting Rights Act, and also utilizing a lot of the same criteria that's used in the state's Fair Maps Act, which is a statewide law that affects county and city redistricting primarily, but also, as with much of redistricting, the process is very norms-based. It's very focused on trying to adopt best practices. And so we sought wherever possible to use those best practices in this redistricting or in this districting process. So we are now narrowed down after looking at several maps to 2 draft maps. Draft map A, which is based on cities. So starting with the idea of maintaining city boundaries, which does have a lot of relevance to a lot of residents who might really understand what city they're from and identify with the city that they're from, and where those lines end up making more sense potentially to them. And that is one of the criteria in the state's Fair Maps Act, is that districts are understandable to voters. So while we're creating districts that are equal size, keeping an eye on the Federal Voting Rights Act, considering all these other criteria, that could be one of the ones that that the board wants to focus on. So as we started with cities as the basis, we then went to making sure that the districts were also meeting all those other criteria. Draft map C started with school districts. And so where we could, we built the plan out of school districts. And then from there, made sure that we followed maybe other rational geographic lines like city boundaries as kind of a secondary criteria in order to create that population equality and create balanced and fair districts. Today's hearing is an opportunity to take in the feedback you've received and any additional feedback and decide on a direction that you'd want to go in at your next hearing to adopt plans for the next decade. So these plans are based on the input from the board, and these maps do follow all of the required criteria. Let's start just by looking at the district as a whole. So right now, each of the trustees is elected in an at-large election system where residents from anywhere in the district can be voting for their trustees, and trustees can live anywhere in the district. This will change both of those relationships. The district is roughly 450,000 people in terms of total population. So relatively large, nearly 500,000 total residents. Of those, about 250,000 of the residents are citizens that are a voting age population. And so we utilize both these data sets, the total decennial census for determining the size of districts, and the citizen voting age population, the second data set, in order to determine any Voting Rights Act concerns or the effectiveness that different minority populations would have in these districts. Draft Plan A, like I mentioned, is the plan that starts based on cities and then goes to other criteria. If we look at the overlays, now all of these are available on the website if people want to take a closer look. What we do is we take the underlying cities, and those are shaded. And then the districts that are being proposed, as you can tell, are the outlines on top of those shaded areas. So you can see as an example, this darkish blue is the city of Palo Alto, and you can see this shape here that comes out, and somebody says, well, why is that district shaped like that? Well, it's shaped like that to follow the city boundaries. And so in several cases with the city of Sunnyvale and the border between Sunnyvale and Mountain View, we have the same kind of boundary line, or Mountain View and Los Altos. Not in every case were we able to keep cities within districts. In the last hearing we went into a little exploration about, well, why couldn't we keep Cupertino entirely within a district? And it came down to the idea that Cupertino not only right now is outside of the district in 2 points, it's outside of the district over here where it meets with Santa Clara, and then down here where it touches the Saratoga. But it also means that if you were to draw Cupertino into one district, you might strand the San Jose, Saratoga, and Santa Clara portions to the east. When we look at the high school district overlay on this, you can see that it does somewhat follow some of the same boundaries, but not as tightly to those boundaries as a criteria. We have starting with the high school district, we also have the elementary school district. Elementary school districts are nested inside of high school districts, and they exist where there is not a unified school district. So the unified school district that overlaps the agency is the Palo Alto Unified School District. And you can see that that area is blank on the prior two maps. When we look at Plan A in terms of its total composition, we know that when I said that the districts on average, that the district total size is 450,000, that you divide that by 5, that the average trustee area would be around 90,000. And when we look at that, each of these districts is really close to 90,000, with the district that's the most overpopulated being District E, which is this district down here on the Cupertino side. And that district is 4% overpopulated. The most underpopulated district is District B, which is up here in the Mountain View area. And that district is 2,500 population underpopulated, so minus 2.7. The total planned deviation, meaning the difference between the highest and lowest districts, is that sum of those, the absolute value of those two numbers, so 6.8% total planned deviation. We can also look at the below here, the citizen voting age population, and we can look at, as an example, the percentage of Latino population being highest in District C, and then the Asian population being highest in District E, where it's nearly 60% at 58.7% Asian population by citizen voting age population. Draft Plan C is the second plan that was being considered. And again, this started with the idea of following school districts instead of following city boundaries. So when I first talked about that leg of Palo Alto coming down here, now that leg is no longer there as it's following that high school district boundary that we saw for District A. So if we look at the cities, you can see that it doesn't follow that Palo Alto leg down here. It has a completely different relationship, as an example over here, to where the city of Cupertino is, and a very different relationship, actually not as different a relationship as we saw earlier, a very similar relationship to the other plan in the Los Altos border here. When we look at the high school districts, you can see those high school districts and this area without a district, this A is that unified school district, Palo Alto Unified School District. The elementary school districts, you can see that the elementary school districts, as an example, provide some of the deviation, some of the separation here between these two seats, C and E. And then that lone high school district up here, which is entirely within this District A, which is pretty amazing that that just happened to be right at that 90,000 population number. When we look at the total planned deviation for this, using that same kind of math, we get to 5.4% total planned deviation. When we look at the ethnic populations at the bottom, we see that District C once again is the district with the highest Latino population. The District E is the highest with the Asian population, this time at 50.6. And we see a slightly higher population of Asian in the District D at 43.9. Now, one other issue that was mentioned earlier by the chair was that since these districts are going to be used for elections, there's going to have to be a process of sequencing elections. It is our responsibility as a consultant only to come up with a potential numbering system. We didn't look at what might be the preferences for the board in any way. We just randomly assigned election numbers to each of these letters and election dates. So this is not even elevated to a proposed numbering system. It's just a potential numbering system that we have to provide for this map as you go forward. It would be our recommendation that you look rationally at these new boundaries. You look at what makes most sense, both for what these districts should be numbered and also as they're numbered when they should be coming up. The one thing we would recommend is that it looks as though, and as we understand it, you have 2 seats coming up in 2022, and then you have 3 seats up in 2024. A natural numbering that most counties would request would be that 1, 3, and 5, the odd numbered districts, be the districts that are up in 2024, and 2 and 4 would be the even numbered districts that would be up in 2022. Now, which letters are assigned to which numbers is really the domain for the board to decide, and we don't have an opinion. If there was a group that came forward, the law does request or recommend essentially that you take into consideration any requests from the community as to how to number districts. And this becomes very important in some cases where, let's say, a group that is a protected class comes forward and says, our 18% Latino district would be more effective for us to be able to elect a candidate of choice if it was held in a gubernatorial election cycle, as an example. That has come up quite a bit around the state where you have lower turnout for Latino populations, that putting those Latino populations in an election cycle that aligns to the presidential election makes those elections more effective. We've also seen the opposite. We've seen groups that say, hey, it's great that you're having district elections. We really want to have this district election impact our community sooner rather than later. So we don't care as much about whether it's in a presidential or general or gubernatorial election. We just want it to be in an election that comes up immediately so that we can, as soon as possible, elect somebody from our community to be on the board. So this is completely a decision that is in your hands, but we just provided a potential numbering system to get the ball rolling. And with that, I'll go ahead and close my screen and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate that thorough update. I do have one request to speak. Turning to the Chancellor and Paul to see if there are any other requests to speak that we've received. All right. At this time, I'd like to invite Sue Graham. President Shively, can you assist in helping with the microphone if there's not one up there already? Thank you. Oh, my apologies. There's one up. Thank you. Sue is here on behalf of the League of Women Voters. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was going to say that myself. I'm Sue Graham. I'm here with the League of Women Voters of Los Altos Mountain View. And I would like to comment on the discussion of the maps from the December 13th Community College Board of Trustees meeting. The League feels that the trustees' evaluation of the three maps, A, B, and C, was not adequately explored at the December 13th board meeting. Map B was eliminated, with the only explanation being that it was confusing and unwieldy. The board pressed forward to advance only two maps for staff and the consultants to consider. We hope that when the final map is selected, that the trustees will provide a thorough explanation of why each map was selected or not selected, so that the public can understand your reasoning. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sue. Appreciate that feedback. We'll definitely take that into consideration. All right. As I've given the explanation and following or prior to rather Paul Mitchell's thorough presentation, I would like to do the same thing that we did at the last board meeting, which is allow all members of the board to go through and have at least a little bit of input to avoid the back and forth. So I'd like to start to my right with Trustee Homianfar. Your comments.
I'll put it simply, I prefer map A.
In light of the League of Women Voters comments, perhaps we can provide a little bit, if you have any explanation as to why you prefer each map.
I think it's better for us to choose A. I guess I prefer that the map is more geared towards the cities as opposed to the school districts. I think it's better to just keep the cities whole instead of going to school districts.
Great, thank you so much for that. Trustee Landsberger, your comments.
I basically concur with my colleague to my right. I think the map that starts from the city boundaries and incorporates the other criteria is the preferred choice, although I think both of them are ultimately acceptable. And again, it's largely because I think that's the most comprehensible to members of the public. They know what city they live in. And it also helps the trustees and relate well to each of their constituent areas.
Thank you. Trustee Chang.
I want to thank Paul again for your presentation tonight. I think it just helps bring home the importance of the overarching criteria, and then the thought process in terms of you and your staff in putting together the maps A, B, and C. I think we totally understand that thought process, and we support how you constructed each of the variations. I also believe that as we look at A and C now, that both are good candidates. I do see that we have input, small number, albeit, from our community that is saying that map A is a good choice. I do believe that most of the community does relate to the city boundaries, and for sure that then doesn't only include the student and family populations that look at school district boundaries even more closely. So if I were to say, based on the criteria that was presented tonight, as well as a preference from my standpoint, I do see that the data points toward map A. Again, I think I said that last time too, that it's more clear and it meets all of the criteria.
Thank you, Trustee Chang. I will hold my comments for last. I'd now like to turn to Vice President Casas.
I guess I concur with my colleagues that either map would meet constitutional criteria and is well balanced with populations in each district. I could go with either map, but I tend to prefer map C. And the only reason is because it does divide the trustee areas into educational feeding districts, and we're all about education, and we're a community college. So to me, the interests of a trustee would be more towards education, not city council meetings and that kind of thing. So I would move more towards a map C.
Thank you for that explanation, Trustee Fernandez.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid argument as well, but I'm gonna have to go with map A just because as someone mentioned, it's very clear people relate more to the cities that they belong to, and the areas are roughly about equal population size. So I think that the more clear option in this case. So I would go with A.
Thank you, Trustee Fernandez. Trustee Wong?
Thank you, Patrick. As Mr. Mitchell did a wonderful job with his staff in the presentation, I really appreciate it. I can understand some of the board members going with map A, but if you want to say equity regarding cities, and especially you do not have a representative currently from the city of Palo Alto and the city of Sunnyvale. If you look at map A, yes, Palo Alto is more or less in District A. Yes, you can say that all of Mountain View is in map B, as well as Los Altos and Los Altos Hills is in map D. However, I think that for the city of Sunnyvale folks, they will beg to differ that their city is divided into 3 different regions in 3 different districts. Northern Sunnyvale is in map B, Central Sunnyvale is in map C, and Southern Sunnyvale is in map D. And if you look at the city of Cupertino, you have 80% in area E and approximately 20% in map D, which I'm kind of eyeballing right now. The reasons why I would support map C is that our school district is, as Laura was saying, Foothill-De is based on the 3 high school attendance area that feeds into our schools. Traditionally, Mountain View and Palo Alto Unified, as well as Mountain View, Los Altos feeds into Foothill College, and the Fremont Union High School District, consisting of about 5 or 6 different cities, feeds into De Anza Community College. I believe that if you look at map C, you see that Sunnyvale Elementary more or less fits into area C, so that's tightly intact. Map attendance trust area B matches with the Mountain View Weissman elementary area, and A matches with the Palo Alto Unified. More or less, Los Altos Elementary goes into all of D, versus Cupertino Union. There's no way to fit it in one district because population-wise, it would have to be split into 2 districts, and I see that evenly divided in D and E, which makes sense for our voters and our residents. There's no equal way of doing it, and I think that Mr. Mitchell did the best he could. So that's why I strongly support um, Plan C. If for some reason we were going to do Plan A, I would request Mr. Mitchell to draw a map where all of Cupertino is together in one, in map E, in area E, and take out from either Sunnyvale or Saratoga, which makes sense. But Plan C makes the most complete sense. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Wong. Let's see, I'd like to just stop for a second before I give my comments. Paul, did you want to answer any of those questions or comments that Trustee Wong had? Should I
No,
wait
the
till
only
the end?
thing that might take some more review would be whether or not it is possible to draw Cupertino more whole. The impacts that it definitely isn't possible to draw it whole. I mean, Cupertino isn't entirely within the community college district to begin with. And then if you were to draw it as whole as possible, you still would have to cut through Cupertino to come in behind it to grab the populations of San Jose and other portions that would make the district overpopulated by more than is allowable under the deviation. So we could, if we were to come back with a revised version, do something to maybe make it a little bit more whole, but it wouldn't be possible to make it entirely whole.
Mr. Mitchell, what I was suggesting is only redraw it if we were to pick map A. If we were not to pick a map A, we would not need to redraw it. If for some reason you were to redraw it, my suggestion is to keep Cupertino as a whole, and the ones that you would have to take is from the southern part of either Saratoga or from Sunnyvale. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you so much, Trustee Wong and Paul. I just wanted to, for my comments, just really remind my colleagues how much of an exhaustive process this has been over the last several meetings. All of the work that Becky Bartendale from the Chancellor's office has done. Thank you again, Becky. I still see your emails going out, even as late as today, of trying to solicit as much input and awareness as possible. That has been no easy task on top of everything else that we've been going through. So I can attest to how exhaustive this process has been. I've gotten emails about this from all kinds of organizations that I didn't know was broadcasting it. So I'm really very happy to see how much this has been getting around town. In terms of the number of meetings we've had, I've mentioned that, the amount of comments that have come in, the emails, the stakeholder meetings. I even think President Holmes presented at Rotary. So thank you, President Holmes, for your service there. And then I will just say that I like either or map. I like map A, I like map C. I have a preference towards map A, just as Trustee Homion mentioned. I think we have to keep the community in mind. These are community maps. This board is elected by the community and will be, for the first time in the history of the district, elected by area elections. To make it as simple as possible for people to know by keeping cities together is really, really important for me, because as much of a nerd as I am, I've memorized both maps and where the lines are. My sense is not everyone is going to know that in the community of exactly where their lines are being drawn, but they do know more or less the city boundaries. And so that is my preference. I also, like my other colleagues, am perfectly fine with map C as well, if that's the direction that we go in. I am hesitant, though, to have the board give direction to redraw any lines, given our commitment to not only be removed from the line drawing, our commitment to the community to do that, and number two, based on the deviation that Paul Mitchell had mentioned. But I'd love to see if there are any additional comments or motions by my colleagues. Trustee Cassis?
It is a comment here to draw additional maps. Is that what you're
I-
asking, or?
So based on the process that was laid out from the beginning, I would like us to follow. We had 3 maps. We're down to 2 maps. I would like to see a motion to adopt 1 map tonight. That's not going to be the final map. We will take that 1 map, and that 1 map will be on the agenda item for next month's board meeting, at which time we will need a final adoption according to the law. It needs to be finalized. At that point, that whole month, we can have discussions,
What,
input, but my hesitancy again is for the board not to redraw lines. The maps that were given to us are not created by the Board of Trustees. They are created by our independent redistricting consultants who are experts in their field in doing that. But my preference moving forward is to give the community as much time as possible to study what we believe is the best map moving forward.
okay, so I'm not in favor of doing any more maps. I think this has been an exhaustive process. We've been here September 13th, October 4th, December 13th, and today. A tremendous amount of work has gone on. I don't want to draw more maps. I think it confuses the process. I think we have 2 fine maps here. So let's limit the discussion on the 2 maps. But I'd like to hear from my other colleagues. I'm open if they want to open up this process. I'd like to hear from you.
Sure. I'd like to call Roberta Humlin from the public, also from the League of Women Voters.
Good evening, Roberta Holloman, and I want to comment on drawing lines on these maps. I think if you did that, you would have to start all over again. The public is used to having the number of hearings that you have set up. You have followed a process that has been accurate, has been correct, has been fair, and the public, as I see it, feels you're doing a good job right now, and I think redrawing any of the lines would be very difficult.
Thank you, Roberta. Sounds like we have.
Yeah, and in reaction to Trustee Casas just opening further and yourself,
Mhm.
I'm in agreement even with Ms. Holloman's statement. I think it is not on us to draw or even redraw or to even change any of the maps that we are being presented with.
Trustee Landsberger, you had a comment?
I agree.
All
Trustee
right.
Wong has a
The
comment.
shortest comment you've ever had, Trustee Landsberger. Trustee Wong?
I just want to reiterate that if you're going to be based it on cities, the folks who are in the city of Sunnyvale would be in 3 different districts, and that an electorate wouldn't be identifying as one person versus all the other cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Wong. Well, I would like to see a motion tonight if possible. Again, we have until next month is our final meeting where we must decide on a map. It is 2022 and we will be having these elections. So we'd like to give the community and the board some clarity. If there's a motion tonight, yes. Trustee Omianfar, do you have a motion?
Yeah, I make
So
a
we don't
motion
have to vote tonight. I mean, if there's no motion, both maps can be moved forward and we can make the final decision on what it is. So the board does have the right not to make a motion tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarifying point. Just to make it-
You're welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Trustee Wong. That's a good point. And let me just be clear. We do not need to whittle down the maps tonight. We could still move forward with these 2 maps, A and C, and then have that go for a final vote next month. My preference is to go in this right direction. But if there are no motions tonight, I will follow the will of the board. Trustee Homianpar.
I make a motion to approve map A.
Motion by Trustee Homianpar. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second
Trustee
by
Wong wants to
Trustee
comment.
Landsberger. Absolutely, yes. Are there any comments? Trustee Wong?
Yes, I will be voting no. I think the best thing is to present these two maps to go out to the public, because I feel that the folks who are in Sunnyvale who does not have any representation, I think that those folks should be reached out to, especially with the Sunnyvale area. There's one district where it will be just the Sunnyvale Elementary, so there is people of community of interest in that particular area. And then the other area of Sunnyvale will be Cupertino Elementary. So by dividing up those two different cities based on the two elementary school district makes absolutely more sense than to further divide it into three different districts. So I urge my colleagues to either abstain or to withdraw their motion.
Thank you, Trustee Wong. And that's the frustrating part in this process, is trying to not split up communities as much as possible, but given the population, we do have to stay within our deviations. So I do have a motion and a second. Are there any other further comments?
Yes, talking about deviations, President Aaron's, that if we want to have a lesser deviation, Plan C has a 5.6 deviation versus Plan A has a higher deviation of about 6 point something. So we also want to look at to have the least deviation as possible and to try to keep community of interest within the cities, even though they have to be divided, intact. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Wong. I really sort of appreciated Paul Mitchell's comments on the deviation. I'm wondering, Paul, if you can comment on that. You had mentioned at the very beginning of this process, or at least in a previous meeting, about how the exact equal or zero deviation is not always necessarily a good thing. I'm wondering if you can remind the board why that is.
Yeah, happy to. And I think that all the comments that are being made are valid, the kinds of comments that you should be thinking about and the ways you should be thinking about these lines. With regard to specifically the question around deviation, I talked at the very, very beginning of our process that there was this deviation idea that districts needed to be equal size, but local governments were given a total 10% buffer from the largest district to the smallest district. And some people, even myself, when I first started doing redistricting over 15, 20 years ago, really held to the idea that a plan that had a smaller deviation was better because it was a metric you could look at and you could say, oh, this number is at 1% or 2%. But the reality is that, as has been discussed, keeping cities more whole, or keeping school districts more whole, or keeping communities together, or keeping districts to have a more natural shape are all actually higher ranking criteria and make for better districts than some district being a perfect deviation. And even the deviation itself could be questioned simply because we had what I think most people would consider a pretty poor census in this decade. And being able to say, oh, this is a 0% or 0.1% deviation is really somewhat fiction, when we know that there were significant errors in undercounts in certain communities. So even a perfect deviation is not a perfect deviation anymore.
Thank you, Paul. Any further comments, questions from the community, from my board colleagues? I know this is a really, really tough decision, so I am belaboring the points. I know that, but this is a decision that's going to be affecting our future makeup of our board and our elections. And so I want to be as exhaustive as possible. Vice President Casas.
I'd like to just make one comment. Our district actually doesn't represent all of Sunnyvale. So to say that we're splitting, I mean, Sunnyvale's already split up. So, I mean, I understand what Trustee Wong is saying, but I just don't know if that point is it has some merit, but I don't think it's that strong.
All right, thank you for that comment. Are there any other comments? We have a motion and second. I will say that I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Paul for being with us and helping clarify these questions. I know that you're doing this up and down the state. And so we really appreciate you being here tonight as your favorite community college district in the state to work with, I know. I want to thank our shared governance process. I want to thank all of the trustees for being collaborative on this. I know that we don't always agree up here on the board, but we're all trying to do our best to do what's right for the community. So I do have a motion in a second. There are no other comments. I'd like to call for a vote. And I'll start with our student advisory vote. Trustee Homianfar,
Aye.
Trustee Fernandez,
Aye.
Trustee Landsberger.
Aye.
Trustee Chang.
Aye.
Trustee Aaron's is aye. Trustee Cassis
Aye.
and Trustee Wong.
No.
President Aaron's, and I
Yes.
just have a point of order here to be very clear that the board is moving the map forward, not approving it.
Correct.
That is for the February meeting. So I just wanted, no, that's okay. That's why Paul is here, to make sure that we have the right.
Totally
word.
fine. So
Thank you.
we'll state for the record, and Trustee Homianfar's intention was, and to make sure that all my colleagues are clear, to move map A forward. Correct? Any of my colleagues have any questions on that? So the map A is not the final map. We still have one more meeting, as we have, well, as Becky, rather, on our behalf, has time and time again told us our process. We're not cutting this process short. Map A will move forward as an alone map, draft map, that we will present to the community over the next month for final comment and deliberation and ultimate adoption of the final map to be done at our February 14th board meeting on Valentine's Day. So is that clear to all of my colleagues? Making sure we're crystal clear. This is our draft map that we're moving forward for more discussion, debate on February 14th. Are there, okay, so that map is adopted. Thank you to my colleagues. Move forward. That map is being moved forward. The draft map is being moved forward. Thank you again, Paul Mitchell. I hope that you'll join us on Valentine's Day for our final map to show some love.
Wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Thank you very much.